For our literacy lesson today, we are going to be retelling each part of the story mountain of the story of Adelita. So to be successful in today's lesson, we're going to see if we can explain what the parts of the story mountain are. We're going to see if we can remember what happened in parts of the story. We're going to see if we can make notes to explain what happened in different parts of the story. And we're going to see if we can think of any extra details to be clearer in our explanations. And that's going to make it easier to do work later on in the week. So, thinking about the story mountain, there are 5 parts of the story mountain. We looked at this back in the autumn term when we looked at the story of the sheep pig. And the story parts are the introduction, which is where the setting and the characters are introduced in the story. We've got the build up, which is what happens to the characters. We've got the climax, which is where there is some sort of problem, something goes wrong that needs fixing. Then the climax might last a while, and then you've got the resolution, which is where the problem eventually gets solved. So there's a resolution, it's resolved. And then the ending tells you whether it's a happy or a sad finish at the end of the story. Thinking back to the story of the sheep pig, in the introduction, we obviously knew that Babe and Farmer Hoggett were introduced, and they were introduced to the setting of the farm. The characters, Babe wanted to be like the sheep pigs, like a sheepdog. So he wanted to become a sheep pig and wanted to train to do that. Climax, he wanted to enter the competition. Was he going to be allowed to enter the competition? Would Farmer Hoggett see that he was good at doing that? Then the resolution, of course, is that he actually gets to enter the competition. He's taken along, and then he's able to compete and win. So, of course, that is a happy ending to the story. So that was the sheep pig. But now we're thinking about it in terms of the story of Adelita, which we've been looking at for the last week. So have a think to yourself now. What do you think would go in each of these parts of the story mountain for Adelita? Okay, so let's unveil what happens in the introduction. At the start of the story, you meet the characters Francisco and Adela, and Esperanza, who is the helper. Then, of course, Adelita is born. She is the daughter of Adela and Francisco. The setting is in a lovely large castle in Mexico. So that would be introducing the characters at the beginning of the story and, of course, where the story is set. Then to build up the story, sadly, Adela dies and Francisco remarries. He remarries Donna Michaela, the stepmother, and she and the stepsisters are not very nice. And then, sadly, Francisco dies. So you think, oh, what's going to happen to Adelita now? In the climax of the story, Donna Michaela fires Esperanza, says you're not allowed to work here anymore. Adelita is sent to the attic and has to do all the chores. And then there's news of a big fiesta. Prince Javier is having a fiesta, and all are invited to go, but Adelita is not allowed to go. So how is she going to solve that problem? Well, in the resolution, Esperanza helps Adelita. She gets to go to the fiesta, and Javier falls in love with her, but she leaves at 12 o'clock. So how is this going to end now? Is it going to be a sad ending or a happy ending? Well, Javier searches for Adelita, he finds her and says that he wants to marry her. So they marry and live happily ever after. So it is a happy ending in the end. And of course, we know that this story is very similar to the story of Cinderella, except that there are aspects which are different, which are related a bit more to Mexico. So we are going to be having a go today at filling in a grid with ideas about what happened in the story of Adelita. And this is going to help you with your retelling on Friday in the lesson, where you're going to retell the story of Adelita in your own words. So you're going to be story writers. Today is kind of like the planning of your ideas. So when you finish today's work, do make sure you keep hold of it, because you'll be able to use it to help you to do your writing on Friday. To help you out a little bit now, I'm going to show you each of the sections of the grid which you can download and print and fill in. Or if you don't have access to a printer, it's absolutely fine. You can just use a piece of paper and just write down in different sections the things that you need. So in the top 2 sections, we've got the characters and the setting. That will build part of your opening, your introduction to the story. So have a think about what characters there are in the story. Have a think about where the story is set, maybe some adjectives that you could use to describe the setting, and pause the video now to put the characters and setting in those boxes there. Okay, hopefully you've filled in the first 2 boxes. The next box down is the build-up. So remember, the build-up is like what happens in the story to build up towards the big problem or the climax. So I've got some questions there for you to think about. What happens to Adelita's family? How does Adelita feel about this? And then what happens to Esperanza? So you can write about all of those things in the build-up of the story. you need a little bit of extra time, that's absolutely fine. If not, we can move on to the next section, which is the climax. So the climax, I want you to have a think about who knocks on Adelita's door. Who is it who arrives and helps? What do they want? Where does Adelita then go? And what happens at 12 o'clock? So that's the climax of the story, the big chunk of the story, which is probably the most interesting bit of the story, where there's a problem and then what's going to happen? If you filled in your climax box, you can move on to the next section, which is going to be the resolution. Remember, in the resolution, you're going to write about what does Prince Javier then do? What does Adelita do to get Prince Javier's attention? Remember, she's trapped in her room, isn't she? In the tall tower in the castle in Mexico. So how does Prince Javier know where she is? And if you finish that resolution box, the very last box at the bottom there is the ending box. So you need to think now about what does Javier decide to do, what happens to Adelita, and then maybe you can think about what happens to the other characters as well. So obviously you might have the like happily ever after bit where Prince Javier and Adelita fall in love, but what happens to the other characters? What does Donna Michaela do? What does she say? What might happen to the ugly sisters? Oh, I just called them ugly sisters. That's from Cinderella, isn't it? Silly me. What happens to Valentina and Dolce? It's because they're so similar. That's why I thought about that. Okay, so hopefully now you've finished filling your grid in. Remember to keep hold of this grid ready for your work on Friday, where we're going to be retelling the story of Adelita. But these notes will be there to help you to work out what happened in each part and hopefully make your work a little bit easier on Friday. So well done.